So I learned to love being Jewish amidst the sun-dappled hills of California's Santa Cruz Mountains atop Big Basin Way near Saratoga, California, at the Reform Movement's Camp Swig. That's where I actually had my first encounter with Seattleites, who from my parochial perch in San Francisco might as well have been Alaskans, in that anything north of Marin County was deemed the uncharted frozen tundra. Despite the immaturity of my teen rebellion against my father and the chorus of annoying questions about whether I was going to become a rabbi when I grew up, I still connected deeply to my emerging Jewish identity. And some of my most transformative experiences as a Jew and as a person happened in youth group and summer camp. The worship was inspiring and accessible as we prayed in God's gorgeous outdoor shul to the grooving tunes of the late 70s Jewish folk rock-inflected guitar. Some of my earliest experiences with Jewish texts and wisdom came out of that music, with its Dylan-esque or James Taylor-like settings of classic passages from Torah, Midrash, and Pirkei Avot. But perhaps the most impactful and enduring parts of camp were the educational experiences, immersive and interactive psychodramas that recreated key historic moments, like the destruction of the temples in Jerusalem, the migration of early Zionist pioneers to Israel, the courageous resistance of Soviet Jewry, and most famously, the freedom rides for voting rights through the American South. In retrospect, it was a benign yet powerful indoctrination, binding Jewish values to the liberal ideals of the mid-20th century, ideals that secured our place in an increasingly open and accepting America. Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, B'Tselem Elohim, the sanctity of the individual, and Pikuach Nefesh, the saving of life. These inspired our pursuit of civil rights, freedom of speech, openness to immigration, and protecting the environment. This infusing of tradition into social ethics was the hallmark of the Reform movement from its beginnings, as the call of the prophets, the foundation of liberal Jewish identity, affirmed the universal rights and well-being of the most vulnerable in the broader society. And it reflected the desires of most American Jews to secure our acceptance in the larger society. This fusion of traditions and ethics would be our offering to the great banquet of culture and civilization, demonstrating our appreciation for the refuge of peace and prosperity that this nation provided for us after millennia of persecution and genocide. But now, a half-century later, as the seeds of social justice take root in successive generations of young Jews, and the portfolio of progressive causes tied to timeless texts has only expanded, we find ourselves at a bit of a crossroads. The events of October 7th have already proven to be an inflection point that will indelibly mark and change our people. But perhaps the greatest challenge will be their effect on the relationship between American Jews and Israel, and the dramatic disconnect between too many young adult Jews and the Jewish state. This is not a new development of the last 11 weeks. Journalist Peter Beinart presciently called out this challenge 13 years ago in an article in the New York Review of Books. In it, he fired a warning shot across the bow of major Jewish institutions, cautioning that we were losing the next generation. Quote, "For several decades, the Jewish establishment has asked American Jews to check their liberalism at Zionism's door. And now, to their horror, they are finding that many young Jews have checked their Zionism instead." When pushed to choose between a commitment to the human rights of the most vulnerable, in this case the Palestinian people, or an unqualified support for the survival of Israel, even in its defense against a genocidal attack by an implacable enemy, so many, too many of our young people default toward empathy toward the perceived underdogs, rather than rallying around our too criticized cousins in Israel. And while most would say that Israel had the right to do something in response to atrocity, they see the current cost in civilian lives as too high a price to pay. There are many reasons for this, including the pressures of social conformity amplified by social media. But essentially, there are two components that seem to drive the disaffection of many of our young. The first is the rise of identity politics in higher education that flattens and oversimplifies the world between the oppressed and oppressor, and which blithely deposits Israel on the side of settler colonialists and Jews more broadly as privileged beneficiaries of white supremacy. And the second reflects how those in their 20s have only known Israel as a military behemoth run by a right-wing corrupt prime minister, having never agonized over its survival as the beleaguered and scrappy underdog of wars in 1948, 1967, and 1973. Nor have they shared the lofty visions of its enlightened leaders, who risked so much to promote multiple offers of peace to the Palestinians, only to be rejected each time and left instead with intifada and violence. But there is another reason for this disconnect, one that is unique to non-Orthodox Jews more broadly and to the Reform youth movement that propelled so many, including me, to pursue Jewish professional life. In many ways, we failed our young people in teaching them too much about the conscience of the prophets and too little about the passion of the priesthood. We rooted the majority of their Jewish identities in the universal call of social justice and put less emphasis on balancing it with a particular pride in and obligation toward Jewish peoplehood. This is a painful admission for me, for it reveals an even deeper challenge. The feelings that so many of our young adults have about Israel in this moment are less about geopolitics or discomfort with Jewish nationalism. Rather, they reflect an absence of a sense of common cause and common bond with Am Yisrael, with the Jewish people whose lives and experiences are different than ours. Yes, we may passionately disagree with an Israeli government as we would with our own here. And as Jews, we should hold any leadership accountable for actions that defy our values and our ideals. But as Jews, we strive to do so out of a longing for Israel to better realize its founding principles and not toward its dissolution. For it is with the people of Israel, not the state nor the government, that we share a troubled history, a challenging present, and an uncertain but definitively bound destiny. So many of us who grew up both committed to social justice through a Jewish lens, yet deeply rooted in a love for and a need to defend Israel, are struggling with how to remedy this dilemma. How can we reclaim the young adults who resonate more with those perceived as most oppressed by trend and meme? And how can we equip those in middle and high school to better balance care for others with care for our own? Yes, it will require a reassessment of our educational vision and curricula and an investment of resources to bring more of our young people to Israel and to bring Israel more integrally into their lives. But the trite metaphor and old adage of the flight attendant's mandate sums it up well. Before you place the oxygen mask on others, you need to place it first on yourself. Far from an encouragement of a selfish narcissism, this simple insight speaks to a larger need. For it is only if we Jews survive as a people and as a culture that our message and our values will sustain us and compel us to work for the benefit of all. This is not a call to neglect those timeless principles to heal a troubled world that we were taught in our camps, our schools, and our youth groups. Rather, it is a mandate to embrace and amplify them as our uniquely Jewish contribution to a broader world. It is a gift that could only have emerged from a tragic history which enabled us to identify most intimately with the oppressed and the vulnerable. It is a gift that inscribed upon our souls a vibrant vision of the world as it should be, a vision that compels our pursuit of justice, not merely because it's the right thing to do, but because it is the Jewish thing to do. True respect for another's ideals, perspectives, and well-being grows from an appreciation of one's own needs and the responsibility to secure them for others. It is a balance of particular pride with universal obligation, of a commitment to a better world growing from a distinctly Jewish commitment to righteousness. Another well-worn but eminently meaningful bit of Jewish wisdom for this moment comes from Pirkei Avot. I can hear the music it was put to now, wafting through the highest boughs of great California redwoods in summers gone by. Im ein ani li mili. If I am only for myself, who am I? Ukshe'ane la'atzmi ma'ani. If I am not for myself, who am I? Ukshe'ane la'atzmi ma'ani. And if I am only for myself, what am I? V'im lo achshav e matai. And if not now, when? May the care, concern, and obligation we embrace for ourselves and our fellow Jews here in Israel and throughout the world provide us with the powerful platform from which we bind our timeless wisdom to the needs of others and the needs of this moment. And may we inspire those who come after us to always pursue the right and the good and the just, empowered by a pride in who they are and where they come from, standing tall upon the rock of our history and our community to lift others to bask in the light of the one God.